Good afternoon, everyone. And I probably got one of the worst spots during the whole conference. Rainy day, second day of conference, right after lunch, and no beer to give away. So I hope that the content of the presentation at least is interesting and engaging for you. So yes, my name is Estrella Lopez-Brian. I'm the Global Head of Consumer Insights in CPW, a joint venture between General Mills and Nestlé for breakfast cereals. And today I wanted to talk to you about the power of Agile learning and innovation. I'm sure I get a question sometimes about what is Agile innovation? What is it? Is it all about speed to market? And well, yes, certainly speed to market is an important element. There's many other elements, and it's more of an output than an input. Because Agile learning and innovation, it's about consumer centricity, it's about iteration, and it's about learning in the real world. And all of those things are important in order, and usually lead to going to market fast. Let me start by saying that I've worked in multinational companies all my career. I won't say my age, but it's already been 20 years working in different corporations in different parts of the world. And if there's one thing that I've learned is that large corporations today are generally slow, not up to date when it comes to adjusting to the new and changing environment, and with processes that don't necessarily allow them to be as agile as they need to. And what does it mean? It means that they cannot compete with those other small companies or startups, which are the ones that are creating new products and services and brands, not only very rapidly, but also that truly deliver on the new and changing consumer needs and wants. And that's exactly what we want to do in CPW and what we're actually doing in CPW. We're a relatively small company, 4,000 employees. But our parent companies, both Nestlé and General Mills, are huge. So we have to work differently in order to avoid what I call this monster syndrome. And that's what we're here to do, and this is what I wanted to share with you today. So even if the picture in theory looks a little bit like this, the reality, it's much closer to this. Okay, so today I just want to share with you what is, under my perspective, holding big corporations back from performing like small companies do when it comes to developing innovation. So let me start by sharing with you how the models of these two companies look like when it comes to developing new ideas. This is more or less how a regular development process looks like in a large corporation. If you're lucky, you would start with a consumer need, understanding what's the problem and the need of the consumer. If you're not so lucky, you might start with a business need instead, which will give an additional challenge. Then you would move into a concept development stage where you would be developing your brand, your packaging design, what's the benefit you're going after, the reasons to believe, okay? Then once you have all of that ready, you would move to the next stage, which is the product development, whatever form or shape your industry or your company is on. So you would be developing the product that meets the concept that you have developed until you get your right solution. And then almost at the end of the process, you will put everything together and test the whole proposition, the total TPO, and then wait for the measures to come. And if the results are positive, you would go ahead and launch your innovation, right, more or less. And then you would most likely cross your fingers and pray that the product would sell. So I don't know if you're working this way or if you have worked this way in the past, but what is for sure is that I'm sure you would agree with me that this process is generally slow and that it requires big levels of confidence to move from one stage to the next one. And on top of it, testing everything just at the very end of the process, everything together just at the end of the process, doesn't allow enough time to pivot or refine your proposition, which is not very efficient and actually quite risky. On the other hand, this is how a regular innovation process looks like in a smaller company or in a startup. It also starts with the consumer, so empathizing with your prospect users, getting to know who they are and what they care about. I mean, after all, you're trying to solve a problem for them or develop something that they care about. Then you would be moving into the defining stage, and this is about framing your problem correctly, understanding what's the problem you're trying to address from the consumer, as that's the only way to arrive to a right solution. Then you would be moving into the ideating stage, and this is not about coming with the one right idea, but instead to generating the broadest possible amount of solutions for learning purposes. And some of those solutions might be far away from what you're intending to do, but that's okay because it's for learning purposes. Then you would be moving to prototyping, and this is about translating your idea in something more tangible that the consumer can react to. And finally, you would go ahead and test and put it in front of consumers and see how they react to it. And then the process would start again, empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing. I don't know if any of you are working this way, but if you do, you would realize that this process is iterative, it's fast, and it's agile. And in this process, not having a refined idea is not a barrier for learning. You're doing different loops and you're doing this kind of cyclical approach because each of those times you're getting closer and closer to the right solution until you're ready to launch. So by now you might be thinking that the difference between the two processes is pretty obvious, right? The first one is longer usually, the second one is a little bit shorter. The first one is more linear, the second one more cyclical. The first one requires big levels of confidence to move from one stage to the next, the second one doesn't. And all of this is true. But there's one other element that makes the most meaningful difference between the two models. And that is the way we test. And why is that? Because in the first model, you're testing for validating purposes, and this is to confirm things that we already knew. While in the second model, you're testing for learning purposes. This is to understand and learn things that we didn't know, and that makes a huge difference. But why? Why is testing for learning so important? Well, because it's more actionable. Testing for learning minimizes your uncertainty along the process, which will automatically increase your chances of success. And on top of it, is more efficient as you're increasing your ROI in every step of the process. Okay? So we basically want to avoid this. I'm sure you agree with me. We all want to avoid seeing our heads hanging in that wall. Right? And instead, we want our consumers to love our products and to buy them as soon as they are available for them. Right? Indeed, the more they buy, the better. But as Peter Drucker, one of the founding fathers of modern business, said, we as marketers can only do so much to push our products out into the world and into the hands of our consumers. There also needs to be some pull from them. There's so much we can do. There has to be some pull on their side. So I lost my train of thought. So what we need to do is to ensure that we make our consumers aware of our products and make those accessible to them so that they have a reason to buy for us and the product would naturally sell themselves. But how do we do that? It's all about doing things along the process that help us do these three things. First one, understanding your prospect users and their real problems instead of making assumptions. Second, refining prototypes through iteration, okay? And allowing us to refine if we need to. And then learning in a real environment. Those are the three things that will increase our chances of success in the marketplace when we launch innovation. And now I will just walk you through each of those three. The first one, understanding your prospect users and their real problems. This is all about consumer closeness and consumer empathy. You've probably seen this quote over here a million times by now. Empathy is your ability to understand and share the feelings of another, but it's so true. It's about understanding our consumers so that we can see with our eyes, listen with our ears, and feel with our hearts. It sounds very fluffy, but it's so true. We need to know the consumers in order to be able to develop things for them. I love this quote over here from Sam Walton, one of famous American businessmen and founder of Walmart. He said, there's only one boss, the customer, and he can fire everyone else in the company from the chairman on down simply by spending his money somewhere else. Is it true or not? I think it's true, right? If the consumer is not at the center of what we do, none of us would be working in any of our companies. But the most important piece of this is that consumers don't wake up in the morning thinking about our products, our brands, our services, our companies, or ourselves. They don't. And because they don't, we have to flip that. It has to be us who wake up in the morning thinking about our consumers, because that's the only way for us to develop things that they will buy, as simple as that. How do we do that? There's so many tools available I think we're living at so many exciting things in the CI industry because we have so many tools available right now to connect with our consumers. Whatever you're using in your company, maybe this is not all the list, but you can do ethnographies, you can do social listening, you can do Skype interviews, shop with them, go to their homes, do online communities, so many tools. But the most important thing is that getting to know the consumer, it's not the exclusive role of the CI function, of the consumer insight function. It is not. It's everyone's role in the company to know the consumer. And you know what? Because it's the only thing that can drive innovation forward. In CPW, when we do innovation and we put a cross-functional team of people working in a project, every single person in that team needs to equally know the consumer. And why is that? Because the marketing person needs to know the consumer in order to develop an idea and a brand and a product design, packaging design or a benefit that the consumer will care about, right? But then the R&D person needs to know the consumer well enough to develop a product that they will buy and love. But the packaging person needs to know the consumer in order to developing a packaging that the consumer will catch their attention and will buy. So every single function in the team needs to know the consumer super well, and that will be the only way to move the innovation fast towards the same direction. Now I want to share with you one of my favorite examples to illustrate the importance of getting to know the consumer's real problems instead of making assumptions. So imagine that I wake up on a Saturday morning and I say, today, finally the day when I'm going to finally finish assembling that piece of furniture that I started working on 3 months ago. So I get up, I get dressed, I take my car, and I go to the hardware store. And I ask to the salesperson, excuse me, can you help me? I need to buy a drill. So the salesperson might be wondering, okay, if she needs to buy a drill, that's because she wants a drill, right? Wrong answer. I need to buy a drill, but in reality, I don't want a drill. What I really, 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 really need, it's a hole in my furniture. But I need a drill in order to get the hole done. So the drill is the solution to the problem that I have. And we as marketers, more than anything, need to really work hard on understanding what are the problems that our consumers have for us to develop solutions for them. It's the only way. And indeed, the more problems we're able to identify from consumers, the bigger the opportunity for us to develop solutions for them that they will buy, that they will be relevant for them. Okay, so look for consumer dissatisfaction because that's your opportunity. So just to sum up this section, consumer empathy is the only way to be able to identify an opportunity. And identifying an opportunity from a problem is the only way to develop a relevant solution. I believe there's no other way it can work. Okay, so that's the first section. Then we said also that refining prototypes through iteration was the second big or important element in order to do innovation or agile innovation. And what is this about? This is all about the power of an MVP, a minimum viable proposition. This is an early, inexpensive, scaled-down version of your product or service that will help you understand the potential problems that your prospect users might find when interacting with it, for you to find solutions, right, for them. And this is not about coming up with the crappiest possible product or solution, but it's about finding something that is just good enough to progress without losing time and momentum. The simplest and easiest way to illustrate a minimum viable proposition is this famous image over here. I don't know if you've seen it before. But it talks about the importance of making significant improvement over and over. Okay, because this is not about coming up with the expected solutions like you see up there. It's about making unexpected connections about what's important for the consumer for us to develop something, an idea that will be taken to the maximum potential. So I really believe in the power of a minimum viable proposition, and make sure that you just develop things that are good enough to progress, because it'll be another opportunity for learning. You don't have to get it right the first time. But what's interesting and important too is that good solutions are rarely achieved at a first attempt. So what an iterative process does is help you improve your effectiveness of those attempts instead of getting it right at the first chance. So through iteration, we explore, understand, learn, and test the different assumptions with the possibility to always go back and forth until those assumptions achieve a lower risk of failure. I was reading a book about innovation a couple of weeks ago, and I read this nice analogy between the difference between having a catapult and a ladder to reach a certain point in the sky. So through a catapult, you have this one single accelerating chance to take something and bring it really fast somewhere in the sky, okay? On the other hand, with a ladder, you're kind of securing your rungs. You know where you want to put it. You start moving up towards your goal, trying to reach that point. If you're not sure, you can go down, move your ladder a little bit, go up again, until you reach that point. And even if that sounds inefficient, the reality is that the chance of that catapult to break something in the middle of its way, or actually to reach a different point in the sky, it's pretty high. So that would involve going back to the drawing board and starting from the very beginning your development again. So in reality, having your chances of being secure, it's more efficient than the other way. So I would just say, when you're building prototypes, first thing is just start building. Don't think about it too much. Prototyping is all about agility and speed. So, just try to make sure that you are able to transform your ideas into something tangible, and don't worry too much about whether it's perfect or not. It won't be perfect, but that's okay. You will learn and improve. Second one, remember what you're testing for. Do not lose sight of what is the problem you're trying to address for the consumer, and what are the critical questions that you want to answer, because that should be your North Star across the innovation journey. And third, build with the user in mind. If you have built your empathy, if you know the consumer, you're going to build hypotheses and assumptions and then put them in front of them and test them. Some of them might be right, some of them might not be right, but you'll be able to adjust and start again. Okay? So, number 3. Third one, we mentioned that it's important when developing agile innovation is learning in a real environment. So I believe that the best way to maximize the chances to get consumer pull is by learning in a real environment, or in an environment that is as real as possible. And that implies taking a minimum viable proposition of your product and packaging and put it in front of consumers as early as possible in the innovation journey before it's too late to adjust. And there's different ways so many different ways you can do that. And here's a few examples. The first one is a lemonade stand. If you have a proposition that is not refined yet, but you're ready to learn early, you can do something like that. Put a stand in a supermarket and make your product available for sale and learn and see if it catches the consumer attention. In this case over here, this lady right now is gaining so much consumer empathy. And she's learning things and asking questions and learning things that she didn't know before. And she might be taking the opportunity to ask about the product and give the product to try to the consumer and ask about the positioning. All of those are opportunities for learning. And I'm sure you would agree with me that this represents the true entrepreneurial spirit of ensuring that the proposition will sell before investing on it. Because that's what entrepreneurs do, right? They don't have a lot of funds to spend on expensive focus groups or quantitative researches, so they rely on conversations with their consumers and their customers to get feedback about their ideas. Another way to learn is doing a small test in one store. If you have a proposition that it's a little bit more refined, you can just pick a store or several stores and put your product there. And in this case, you will learn about whether your consumers are paying attention to it. And that critical first moment of truth where your consumer is going to decide either to pick your product or the competitor. And you would really get a sense of what it really means to be shelved in a crowded aisle like that one. It's very different when you're learning in theory than when you're really in a real environment. You can also use social. There's so many methods right now, social networks or any other platform on the internet. If you have, you can put your product and your packaging available online. Nothing prevents you to have an advertising in Facebook about your product and see whether consumers stop about it, whether they like it or not, whether they comment on it, whether they share their comments. All of this is unsolicited feedback that it's spontaneous, it's coming from consumers directly without asking them questions, and by the way, it's free. Final example I brought you is new technology. We certainly can use also new technology to learn and to be efficient and to simulate a real environment. VR, for example, it's a great way to simulate a real environment without having consumers physically present all the time. You can test through VR a different context, a different type of store, or even a different market. And it's not a huge investment, so it's very efficient, and we have that at our fingertips nowadays. So basically, I just brought a summary of the 3 elements that I think are important when it takes to developing agile innovation and to ensure that the consumer is at the center of what we do, and all about consumer empathy. So, as I was saying, must be at the center. Figure out where your prospect users are and go find them and go talk to them. That's the number 1 thing. Second, reducing uncertainty along the process, remember, will automatically increase your chances of success. So find methods and tools that help you minimize those risks. And third, learning early and in an environment that is as real as possible allows you to refine and to pivot. And why is this important? Because in a real environment, you will see with your own eyes what is the real consumer behavior instead of what they do, and see what they do instead of what they say. Oftentimes, the biggest insights come from the difference between what consumers are saying and what they are doing. And also, it will allow you to pivot and refine quickly. So by now, I'm just coming to the end of the presentation, and I just wanted to just to share with you and to encourage big corporations to remain competitive in the marketplace in this changing environment and to adjust their ways of learning so that it gets closer to what small companies are doing. It gets closer to this agile way of working where you're putting the consumer at the center, when you're learning with them and when you're refining and pivoting. We don't have to get it right the first time. It's not easy, but it can be done. You can just select one project, one lead market, one team of people and give it a try. And I'm sure it will be worth it. So, thank you.
That was it. Questions for Estrella?
Wow, either
Going
I
once?
cracked it
Here
or no
we
one
go.
was paying attention.
Okay.
Thank
Do you
you.
want to throw it back there for me? Because I'm afraid. Here, there. All right.
Hi, hope you can hear me.
Yes.
First of all, thanks a lot for this great presentation. I had actually a question. I come from that kind of stage where we still used to validate everything and kind of knew what was good enough. How do you decide in this model when you've kind of reached the maximum or when good is actually good enough to go? Could you explain a bit about that?
Yeah. So we also use validation. I'm a true advocate. It's not all or nothing. I think there's different methods and tools available, and we just need to know when to use them. What we usually do in CPW is we use this type of way of working when we are kicking a project, kicking an innovation. And then once we have something, a TPO that is tangible enough, I would say, that you know what are your principles in terms of product and packaging and way of communication, like key message. When you have something that is kind of tangible, then we go ahead and brief specific agencies for developing the final elements, and then we validate too. We validate because it's the way to making sure that you have all the elements perfectly well, and also to know before scaling to other markets whether we have the right proposition in place. So yes, I'm a good advocate also of validation as long as it's used when you have developed your proposition and you're sure that it's the likelihood of success is higher.
Okay, clear. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Any others? Okay, Estrella, thank you. Thank you so much.